As a developer, I have a few tools in my toolbox that really streamline my workflow. Today, I'm going to be sitting down and chatting with Hannah, who's another developer advocate at HubSpot, and we're going to deep dive into one of the tools that makes my life so much easier when it comes to working with APIs. So grab a coffee and a snack and get ready to learn about ways that Postman can enhance your development workflow. Hey, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm Bree, a developer advocate here at HubSpot, and I am joined by the amazing Hannah Seligson, who is also a senior developer advocate at HubSpot as well. And a fun fact about her that I would love to hear a little bit more about is you grow the most beautiful flowers.
I do. I know. Thank you. Yeah, that's it's so I love growing cut flowers, and cut flowers are a little bit different in the sense that they're meant to be grown to ultimately be bouquets. So yeah, I just love growing all types of varieties, sunflowers, zinnias, lisianthus. I mean, I could just throw a bunch of random names at you, but yeah, but ultimately, like, I just love it. So yeah, so if anyone ever wants to talk about not just APIs and HubSpot, but wants to talk about flowers, I'm always up for it. So
Yes, I feel like there is definitely a pipeline from people who work in tech to wanting to start a farm or wanting to
yeah,
homestead or some of the more just like
yeah.
natural things in life.
Yeah, I feel like it's like I think it's because we spend like our day to day just utilizing our brain. And then there's
Hmm.
this aspect of like you want to do something with your hands.
Hmm.
And I just find it very therapeutic, very decompressing. And it's true. Like there are a lot of folks in tech who, whether they're gardeners, they might have like I think there's a someone I know in Devrel who like has a dairy farm. There's a lot of homesteaders. Like there's just a lot of
Absolutely.
us who like this like modern tech in our day to day, and then when we're not doing that, having something that kind of like grounds you. So yeah.
There's the duality. I love it. I love that you can
Hmm.
do all of the tech stuff and then when you're ready to just like shut your computer off,
Yep.
go work with your flowers and go actually be outside and enjoy all that there is to offer out there.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I could talk about flowers and all that kind of fun stuff every day, but I'm really excited to talk with you about Postman because you are easily the Postman aficionado here on our team. And before we get too far into it, can you just tell me at a glance what Postman is as a tool and maybe why it's useful to developers?
Yeah, I feel like if you ever see something related to HubSpot and Postman, I probably have something to do behind that. And
Hmm.
reasoning is because Postman is a tool that allows folks, and I don't want to say just developers, because I think it's the UI is friendly enough for really anybody, whether you're working more on the business side or you're working just more like administrative. But essentially, it is a platform that allows you to test APIs, amongst so many other things. But essentially, what it does is it's a friendly UI that allows you to test REST APIs. So whenever you maybe you come across a HubSpot API, you want to test it out, for example, like our contacts API, and you want to execute like the get all contacts endpoint. Well, Postman would be able to essentially help you do that by allowing you to like input the path to that API. And the path is essentially like that web address.
Hmm.
And what it's going to do is you're going to provide it permissions. And then once you're able to authorize the permissions and have access to that data, you can execute and return that data back to you. And so Postman's just a great way to be able to like get a look at what does the data look like that you're trying to work with. And it just, I think, is a great way to just test any sort of API and understand how it works, whether, like I said, you're a developer or not. So,
Absolutely. And I think that this is a tool for developers of all levels. I know
mhm.
that when I was first learning how to code, I'm more of a front end engineer, and APIs can be a little bit scary to developers when they're just getting started out because it's like one of the first real things where you're working with data. So pulling in that data was tricky for me. And I was doing a lot of that work in the console before I found a tool like Postman. And for GET requests, it's like one thing, but it was very hard to debug and see. Is the problem my code itself and it's not retrieving the data? Is the problem the endpoint? Is the
Yeah.
problem the headers? There's so many different things with APIs that I was not aware of until I was able to see them in a full UI that Postman like kind of has laid out for you. And it just makes it a lot easier to interact.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you bring up a good point. Like this was something we spoke about before where it was like whether you are doing front end development or back end development, it is something that just I think enables developers to build and access data and understand even from a UI perspective, like how is that what is the data that you want to display, like understanding how that works and yeah. So
Yeah, I think it's also just like we were saying too, it's useful for people who might not be developers or have that role of developer, especially when we think about the fact that a lot of tools are exposing different features or like exclusive features to their APIs. And the first one that I can think of immediately is I know OpenAI often offers different models or
yeah.
different features specifically for a or API use. So if you want to be able to access those features, but you don't want to have to go through the hassle of building your own web app in order to be able to use it, Postman is an excellent way to get access to those features. And you really don't have to do a lot of like heavy lifting on your own in order to be able to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And you bring up a good point that like I think what's wonderful about Postman is that like it is a dev like it's what we call a developer first product where it is something that regardless of your industry, if it has something to do with like any sort of API, whether it's your own companies or it's an external companies, like you're able to leverage this tool for all of that. And Postman has so many different features nowadays, like I think it's a drastically different tool than it was 10 years ago when I first started using it as an engineer. And then now utilizing it in DevRel, it's like, it's just such a different experience, I think. And they've improved it personally. I think they've improved it a lot because essentially, like, they're trying to accommodate the different ways that we develop things and build things
Mhm.
nowadays. So,
Absolutely. And that's changing a lot. And I don't want to get too ahead of
yeah,
everything, but
yeah.
I know that that's changing a lot, especially when we think about not just transitioning from how we're using it as engineers to using it as DevRel or maybe even using it in a different function, maybe more on the business side, but also when thinking about how AI is emerging and how that's changing both how we build and how we like utilize APIs as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I won't jump ahead, but yeah,
Yeah,
we'll talk about that later when it comes to
for
like
sure.
AI features.
Absolutely. So when we think about like Postman, we think about it a lot for like testing, but I know you can also
Yeah.
do like you can explore APIs, you can prototype things, and like integrate as well. In those realms, outside of testing, can you think of any situations where it might be also really useful?
Yeah, so in other ways that Postman be useful besides testing your APIs is that they offer ways for you to implement scripts for testing. So let's say that you want to be able to test an API, you're building something utilizing those endpoints, and you want to be able to apply some sort of like unit test of some sort using an SDK, you're able to actually do this. And I think that's really helpful. I also think that they offer mock servers, which I think can be really helpful. There's a lot of debugging and monitoring, so you're actually able to dig into it a little bit, and you're also able to, if you build any sort of like collections or both from like an internal standpoint, like if you're an engineer utilizing Postman to build and design your APIs, versus somebody who is on the external side where you're not building and designing, you're just testing and you want to build a POC, then
Mhm.
like either way, like those tools can really be helpful and it can monitor and tell you like how is that API being leveraged, like why are we running into so many 400s, things like that. Like is that API endpoint not being utilized how it should be? And then I also think Postman can be really helpful when it comes to any sort of documentation, collaboration. They offer different types of like workspaces, which are essentially like what I like to refer to as a container where you can have like custom collections, which are basically individual endpoints put together in a folder. And then like you can add API specs. And then something that we've just started really leveraging at HubSpot is flows. And Flows is a feature where it's like a low code tool where it's a drag and drop, essentially like a canvas where you can chain different API requests together and essentially like create an overall workflow or execution. And I think this is really helpful, especially for folks who like just want to like build out a concept and say, hey, like would this work? And then be able to kind of like utilize that flow feature and be able to see like how that would work out. And so we've actually introduced a new workspace, Flows Workspace for HubSpot. And I think it's really helpful because when we were building the flows, we wanted to identify, okay, what are common solutions developers are providing to HubSpot customers? And what I mean by that is like, how are they scaling the HubSpot account? How are they allowing it to scale? How are they being able to implement maybe a custom function for a business process? And so we have like multiple different flows with different use cases where developers can essentially, utilize different HubSpot API endpoints and have like a workflow of some sort. So there's just so many things. And then lastly, I'll stop rambling, but like they also offer like they have a lot of different toolage for AI development. So
Mhm.
they have what they call their AI agent builder. And I think this can be really helpful because it allows you to essentially build an agent or at least like an orchestrated workflow. And I think this is really beneficial for folks, especially nowadays when wanting to understand like how something might work. And then they also provide like an MCP catalog where, for example, HubSpot, like we offer an MCP server. You can actually access this on HubSpot. And what's nice is like you're actually able to like understand what methods are included in that MCP server, how could it be utilized, and it kind of just gets you a little bit more hands-on with it. So there's so many different aspects and like features that I think we can really benefit from, both from like a business and a developer perspective.
Absolutely. And I think even like hearing all of those features, it really goes back to what you were saying about Postman has really evolved in the past few
Yeah.
years and has rapidly increased in the amount of tools that they're offering developers to improve their workflows. And I think something that you really hit on was the collections and workspaces. And I know that we use that a lot here,
Mhm.
especially in a DevRel capacity. And I actually wanted to ask because I know we went to PostCon about feels like it was just yesterday, to be
I
honest, but I
know.
know it was like 2 months ago at this point. You went to PostCon and you actually got to give a talk about how Postman allows us to scale developer advocacy here at HubSpot. So can you tell me a little bit about like your talk and what that experience is like?
Yeah, so the talk that I did at PostCon, and for those of you who aren't aware, PostCon is like Postman's annual conference,
Yes.
and it essentially just allows builders to come together and share how they're utilizing the tool, both from like an organization standpoint and an individual standpoint. But my talk was focused on like how we actually leverage the tool from a DevRel perspective. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with DevRel, like it's developer relations. What we do is like we essentially are kind of like the liaison between developers who utilize our product and like our internal organization. So whether it is in regards to like our products, our features, anything like that, like we want to be able to educate developers on how to utilize our product. And in our case, HubSpot, like how do you build on HubSpot? And we as a team, like with Bree and I, like we will create content to educate folks on how to do that. Or if they're running into pain points with our product, like how can we alleviate that and help them move forward? And we use content for that. And so with Postman, the focus is how I really wanted to demonstrate that when you have like an engaging aspect to your content, it's going to help that end user use it much more successfully.
Hmm.
So during my talk, I utilized an activity amongst the audience, and I was basically like introducing two sets of instructions. So people would each have an envelope, and there'd be a set of instructions and then a bag of Lego parts. And one set of those instructions would explain how to build that Lego with, multiple formats. There was visual formatting, there was written formatting, and there was even like an engaging aspect, like leveraging Lego, like the actual Lego app. And then there's this other group, and it's like they only had like bare bone instructions and one image to build their Lego. And of course, in my case, it was Lego flowers. So,
Hmm. Of
but it
course.
was right. And it was just like really interesting to see. And my point with that was that I wanted to be able to demonstrate like in real time, like the benefits of having content that you can engage with and also it's in different formats versus something that is just like just some written text. And just be able to demonstrate like the success rates between the two groups. This is because like with HubSpot APIs, we have like I don't even know the number right now, but it's like 80 plus APIs.
Hmm.
And with all of those APIs, we do provide documentation. We do provide reference docs on like how it can be used. But that's not enough. And that's where like our role comes into play in Postman, where it's like we want to be able to leverage Postman so that developers can actually engage with our APIs. They can actually learn from our APIs. And if we create any sort of like content, whether it's a blog post or a YouTube video, that we have some sort of other component where people can really be more hands-on, especially when it comes to our APIs, and that's how we leverage Postman. And so the talk was just demonstrating the success that we've had on our team by leveraging Postman from a content perspective, like as basically like another resource in developer relations when we're focusing on APIs. And it's kind of wild how much like growth we've gotten from creating like these essentially creating these public workspaces on Postman and having a centralized place for all of our API specs, collections. We have three workspaces. So we have one that contains just our public APIs. We have a second that is more catered to like developer use cases and are associated with some sort of content, whether it's a GitHub repo, it's a blog post, it's a webinar. And then we have our flows workspace. And just providing end users or external developers who are building on HubSpot those workspaces, it just gives them a central place to be able to like actually get hands-on and onboard with our APIs instead of sifting through documentation and saying, okay, what's next? So that's what the talk was focused on, was just like really sharing how like we approach our content and the success we've had, but providing and leveraging tools that are engaging. So,
I really loved it. And even the Legos aside, I thought they were super cute. But one reason that I really also love it is because I feel like it makes this piece of technology more accessible.
yeah.
Whenever we add or create multiple pieces of content to serve um, like one concept or one piece of technology, it makes it accessible to more people because we all learn in different ways. I've talked a little bit before about the fact that if you give me a chunk of text, sure, I'll read it, but it's not my favorite because I'm dyslexic. So if you give me a video, that's better for me. And giving me something that I can actually use to play with the APIs, a tool that is formatted around that whole process, like the Postman collections, especially like the public APIs workspace, where I don't have to do any of the setup. It just removes those barriers and allows me to focus on the thing that is important to me, which is building. So it makes it more accessible, and it also is able to speed me up because I don't have to do all of the groundwork. You've done a lot of it
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. Like, we want these things to be accessible and easy for you to leverage. Like, I think in tech, there are already so many barriers and there's already so much to learn. So, like, why not make that easier? That's our job. So,
Absolutely.
and I think it also benefits that, like, most folks who are dev advocates, we've been engineers. We've gone through
Yeah.
like those growing pains of like learning something and like having a lot of trial and error. And when you have someone who's able to like demonstrate something to you and give you a tool to do that, like it's really helpful. So,
Absolutely. And the empathy, number one, is a big part
yeah.
of developer advocacy, but also being able to like advocate for developers, move them forward quicker, and be
Oh,
able to
yeah.
give them that education. That's a large part of our job. But another part of our job that is emerging is not just writing code or documentation or samples for people. We're
Mhm.
also now really writing all of those things, but for AI or
Yeah.
LLMs to be able to train on that data in order to help
Mhm.
other people. And that's a something that's changing literally right in front of our eyes. It feels
No.
like every day almost.
Yeah, it's true. I feel like that was something at PostCon that was a big takeaway is that, and it's something I even shared internally at HubSpot is that we, like, developers are no longer building and designing APIs for humans. This is like a whole new like AI era where it's like we are doing this for agents and like there's just a different approach with development and the tools that we utilize, like they need to be able to accommodate that and like help us move forward and also help us work quickly. Like that is a whole other thing as well, is like just the speed of development nowadays because it's just like this evolution where things are evolving and becoming more and more like catered to a specific use case or just being clarified and so I just think, yeah, nowadays, like the development tools are just so critical and like how we essentially operate as a society and like our businesses and everything else. So that really has to be considered.
Oh, for sure. And I know that you mentioned a couple tools. One that I'm really interested in, but haven't had the opportunity to play with, is Postman's ability to create your own MCP server.
Yeah,
A new concept that I'm still learning about, like day by day, is we are used to, as developers, interacting with APIs to create our applications. But now we're moving into a world where APIs are talking to other APIs, and that is
yeah,
how a lot of the work is
yeah.
being done as well.
Yeah, and like they have this feature with MCPs where you can essentially like create your own MCP server. Like for example, let's say there are some endpoints with AWS and we want to utilize those with HubSpot 8, like certain endpoints. We can create an MCP server for that. That's
That's
wild.
crazy.
So yeah, it's just really neat to see how the things are evolving. And even like at HubSpot, like seeing how we're evolving as well from an AI perspective, as far as like the developer toolage that we're offering and just iterating on. And yeah, it's moving fast. So
Oh, absolutely. And
yeah.
even thinking about like how things are moving here at HubSpot, I know that you covered quite a few of the tools that we offer developers here
Mhm.
at HubSpot, but I just want to dive into those a little bit more because I
Okay.
think they are absolutely essential for anybody who's like thinking about developing on HubSpot.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit more about some of the workspaces and maybe
Yeah.
how people are able to find them if they're interested in developing on HubSpot?
Yes. So if you are looking for, if you're like, hey, this is great, where do I start? We do have a landing page, which is like developers.hubspot/postman. And we maintain essentially on that landing page, you will find access to our workspaces, any relevant content, our most used collections. So you can definitely start there. We are also on Postman's API network. So if you simply just search for HubSpot, you will find all of our collections, our MCP server, all of our workspaces. So you can find those there. And yeah, and so essentially, like with the workspaces, let's say that you're a developer, you've been tasked to essentially like find a way to automate the ticket system. You need to utilize our tickets API. You would reference like HubSpot's public API workspace. And what you could do is you could go to that workspace and you could essentially like fork, well, you could fork a collection and it's going to have all of those endpoints for the tickets API. And so then you can fork that into your own personal workspace. And just so you know, to like have a Postman account, it's free. So you're able to like fork that into your own personal workspace, and then you're able to just like do whatever you want. You can test things, you can write things. There's code generators that they offer. So maybe you're like trying to test an API endpoint, but now you need to implement like some sort of function with that endpoint in Python. They actually help you with those, like providing that code snippet. So there are just so many things that like I think from that perspective, like would be really helpful. And then also when it comes to like our flows workspace, you're actually able to similar process, go there. You can clone a workspace and each flow has like its own associated collection and environment. So any sort of environment variables, and that environment variable will typically be like your base URL, your private access token, and then you'll be able to like basically customize it and execute it in your own workspace. So if there's things you want to modify, and just customize to like your specific scenario, you can do so. So yeah.
I absolutely love it. I've learned so much obviously from you, but also one of the things that I learned about at PostCon was flows, and you were so
Mhm.
amazing and set us up with those because we actually had a booth where we got to talk to a lot of different people who use Postman, some people who knew about HubSpot as well. So those were always really interesting conversations. But as somebody who is a very visual person, I really like flows because it gives you a very distinct visual
Mhm.
of how specific processes work. So
Yeah.
like things like OAuth, which can be a very
Yes.
like complicated task and a very complicated like flow, for lack
Mhm.
of better words.
Mhm.
So being able to see the OAuth flow that you built that takes you exactly through exactly how the tokens are generated and all of those different branches. And I even remember it's not just a low/no code generator. You can actually import
Yes.
your own code blocks as well and run transformations on the data that you get. So it
Yep.
just makes it really easy to see exactly what's going on, how all of
Yeah.
those different pieces are moving together and where data is going and moving.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, with flows, it's like it is kind of like a mini application because they have all these different like drag and drop blocks and like there's ones with they give you like if statements, you can loop through data. There's an evaluation block where you can utilize they have their own custom language called FQL and then you can utilize TypeScript. So I've definitely brushed up on my TypeScript. But essentially, yeah, you're able to essentially see that logic, understand like what it is doing. You can even like add documentation. I did my best to do that to explain like what each block is doing.
Yeah.
Um, and then it is really helpful. And then this is, I think, comparing that to even like with scripts specifically with Postman, like within each request that you're making, you can actually add like a pre-request script and a post-request script. And I think taking that logic out of that and then putting it like by utilizing these code blocks with workflows, it really does, just like you were saying, give you that visual accessibility to understand like what is happening. And then understanding that. And I think it's also really helpful for folks who maybe they see one of these flows and one of them was like an invoice creation
Mm-hmm.
workflow. And let's say someone's like, oh, I need this actually, like I need to utilize something like this. They could share it with their developer or somebody who's maybe more technical on their team, be like, hey, is like, does this make sense for us? Like, could we utilize this or could we maybe build this for a production? And, you can work with someone, actually have like, I think it also facilitates conversations between folks
Yes.
better who are less technical, more technical, and be able to see eye to eye and understand what each other need. So I also think there's a benefit there.
Absolutely. And this is definitely, I don't know how I was working with APIs before I learned about Postman, honestly. I was just using console logs and just kind of placed them everywhere. It was very haphazard, very much to the wind. But this is definitely a tool that I recommend all developers have in their little toolbox.
Mhm.
But in terms of thinking also about having it as a tool, in general with working with APIs,
Yeah.
because I know that I was definitely not an expert coming from the front end world, and you are more of an expert having been a back end software engineer yourself. Are there any tools or any tips that you would be able to provide me or anybody who's watching about best practices
Yeah.
when using or implementing APIs?
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so I guess like something I would suggest, and this can be both applicable for any API and then also HubSpot APIs. Like first and foremost, if a service, an API offers a batch endpoint, I'm highly suggesting leveraging that. And why is because let's say you need to leverage a large amount of data. A batch endpoint allows you to do this with a single request as opposed to 10 requests, like 10 get
Mhm.
requests or puts or what have you. And so I think this is really important and it also helps mitigate you reaching like your rate limits. And rate limits are essentially like a limit that is put on how many requests that you can make like per day. And a lot of times that is the case when you are utilizing a API that is not, you don't own the server to.
Hmm.
So if you're using HubSpot's APIs, like that's hitting our server. So we only allot certain rate limits and limits that you can make those calls. And like for specifically, like I know for like our OAuth apps, which I guess like I think this is very much like a HubSpot thing, but like we are currently offering like public-private apps, and public apps utilize our an OAuth token, and then there are private access tokens. Um,
Hmm.
and so for OAuth apps specifically, like you can only make requests every 10 seconds, whereas like the way that we treat private access tokens, those are kind of like it depends. There's other specifics applied to that. So yeah, I would say whenever having the opportunity to leverage a batch endpoint for a large amount of data, do so. And then I guess that kind of like bleeds into like how to utilize like permissions.
Hmm.
Like this is something that I have also learned the hard way. Like, because I think folks, OS can be intimidating, but
Yes.
I don't want to say it's not because that dismisses it, but I think just understanding the point of it and how it processes is really important. And as well as like a private access token. And like essentially you need these tokens so that you can access specific data. And
Hmm.
each of those tokens have like certain amount of what we call scopes, the essentially permissions applied to those tokens. So for example, if you want to collect all of your contact, your company, your deals, and your ticket data, but you also need to get like maybe what's another like some sort of custom object data, but you don't apply those scopes to that token, then you won't be able to access that data. And
Right.
so that's something that's really important is understanding that like when you are setting your permissions with these tokens, that you're doing it in a smart way, like you're accounting for like everything that you need, but you also don't want to request too much either,
Yeah.
because there are issues with that. So yeah, I just feel like that's really important. And typically with like an OAuth token, like you're going to utilize like a client ID, a client secret,
Hmm.
and then you can utilize essentially like the access token that you get when you initiate the OAuth process to then request like refresh tokens. And it's overall just like a safer experience for you, your end users, and so forth. And luckily, at HubSpot, like we've established a good partnership with GitHub where if any sort of token, whether it's OAuth, private, there are tokens related to like our marketing emails. I think there's a developer API key, and I'm forgetting some of the other tokens that we offer. But like if GitHub is able to essentially identify any exposed tokens, we will
Hmm.
deactivate those for you.
Yes.
And that is really, really important. And like when you are developing, you need to use an environment, like some sort of environment variable. Like you do not want to like hard code your tokens in your code base at all, anywhere that could be checked into that repo. Like I think we've probably all been guilty of that, but
Oh,
that's a
yes.
big no-no. Because
Huge no-no.
yeah, because you're about to get hacked. So, I mean, I hope not, but yeah. So that's really important. And I just think these are things that like people just need to really practice, like just be mindful of and just ensure that like you're doing your due diligence to protect your data and also be smart about how you're trying to access your data.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for those tips because I know that even as we are leveraging AI more to help us to write code and help us generate it, things like that aren't really lessons that you learn
Right.
from just generating code. Those are definitely lessons that maybe, like you said, you've had to learn the hard way. I can tell you personally, I have checked in accidentally many a
Yep.
private access key or anything like that.
Yep.
I'm not
Yep.
proud of that, by the way, but
Yeah.
it has
Use
happened.
yeah, yeah. Use your git ignore file.
Yes.
put .env. Yes, like don't do that.
No, it's not a good thing, and it's not an easy thing to undo either.
Yeah,
So, once the mistake is made, I promise
it's
you will
out there.
definitely learn the lesson.
Yeah, yeah, seriously. So,
Yeah. And for OAuth specifically, if you're interested in more, because I literally just did a video on this not too long
yeah.
ago on the YouTube channel, I love how you explained it. And one of the ways that I thought about it was a digital valet, especially when you're thinking
Ah,
about different scopes or permissions. You want to
yeah.
give the valet the key to your car. You don't want to give them your whole keyring
Yes,
with access to your house and your
I love
storage
that.
or any other things that you have.
Yeah.
You want to be very granular, like with those permissions, and not really provide too much.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. I love that. And unfortunately, I just started realizing, oh, I should probably take all my keys off and here's my car key.
Right? You know what? I don't even have a lot of car keys. I literally just have my one car key. I don't even really have a house key, but
Ah.
that's all the digital age with digital locks and stuff
Yeah,
like
I
that.
was like, wow, you have a smart house. Cool.
I wish. Oh my goodness. But before we wrap things up, are there any last either tips or highlights or any just general knowledge that you can provide HubSpot developers or just like the broader developer community?
Yeah, I guess like I always encourage folks to definitely check out our developer documentation. I feel like there is more information there than people realize. And so, as someone, I've only been at HubSpot for 3 years, but it's taught me a lot, and it's also really beneficial to connect with people in our community, to understand maybe some small nuances. And also, like, give yourself some grace. Like, if something seems complicated, it probably is. It's not just you. And I think it's important to like engage on our community forum and our Slack channel. Share your questions, whether it's on LinkedIn. And also, like, we want to know as well because we want whatever content we're creating to be relevant, to be valuable and helpful. So if there are things that there's a gap as far as knowledge that we can provide content for, let us know. But yeah, I would definitely start with like we have a developer landing page that you can check out resources. But we also have our API docs and they are constantly evolving and improving. And I'm excited to see like every year I feel like we make like a lot of improvements. So I'm happy about that. And I feel like people should definitely check it out.
Absolutely. I just want to thank you so much for joining
Thank
me
you.
today and talking
Yeah.
about APIs, about Postman, and just general best practices
Yeah.
for our developers here at HubSpot and ways that we can improve the HubSpot development process. I am
Definitely.
going to leave links in the description to everything that we talked about today and even a couple of more things. So be sure to check out the link below and make sure that you're subscribed to our HubSpot developers YouTube channel for videos just like this and so much more. And until next time, thank you so much for joining us, Hannah.
Thank you.